The mud of Western Europe was slick with blood and fuel in the final months of World War II as the Allied war machine pressed hard against the borders of a crumbling Third Reich. Leading this relentless charge was General George S. Patton, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency and aggressive tactics struck absolute terror into the hearts of his enemies. When a desperate German commander realized his forces were completely surrounded, he reached out to Patton with a plea to spare his final battalion, hoping for a shred of military chivalry. The American general's response was not just a turning point in that battle, but a historic declaration that defined his brutal philosophy on warfare. To understand how this intense psychological standoff unfolded, we must look at the immense pressure both sides faced as the global conflict neared its violent end. And if you love uncovering these hidden moments of history, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. By early 1945, the German military was a shadow of its former self, yet its remaining units fought with the fierce desperation of trapped animals. Patton's Third Army was moving at a breathtaking pace, breaking through defensive lines and capturing thousands of enemy combatants every single day. The German High Command knew that facing Patton meant facing an unstoppable force that refused to slow down for any reason. In the midst of this chaotic retreat, one German general found himself cut off from reinforcements, his ammunition depleted and his young soldiers exhausted beyond human endurance. He knew that total annihilation was the only alternative to a formal surrender, but pride and duty made him hesitate to simply lay down his arms without attempting to negotiate some terms. He decided to send a formal message directly to Patton's headquarters, a move that would trigger one of the most chilling verbal exchanges of the entire European theater. The German commander's message was a mixture of military formality and hidden desperation, pleading for the lives of the young men under his direct command. He requested that his final battalion be allowed to withdraw with dignity, arguing that further bloodshed would serve no tactical purpose for either nation at this stage of the war. Patton received this communication while reviewing maps in his mobile command trailer, surrounded by the constant roar of distant artillery fire. His staff officers watched in silence as the general read the translated words, his face hardening into an expression of cold, unyielding determination. Patton did not see war as a series of polite compromises, but as an absolute test of national will where the enemy had to be utterly broken. Instead of offering a diplomatic compromise or showing traditional battlefield mercy, he prepared a response that would echo through military history for its sheer, uncompromising intensity. To Patton, the concept of allowing an enemy battalion to simply walk away was a dangerous weakness that would only prolong the misery of the war. He famously believed that the quickest way to end the slaughter was to fight with such overwhelming violence that the adversary lost all hope of resistance. The German general had hoped to appeal to Patton's sense of professional respect as a fellow career officer, but he severely misunderstood the American commander's mindset. Patton viewed the German military machine as an evil that needed to be completely eradicated from the face of the earth, not bargained with. He picked up his pen and dictated a reply that made it clear that the time for negotiations had passed years ago on the battlefields of North Africa and Sicily. The stage was set for a brutal conclusion, as the American forces prepared to execute their orders regardless of the human cost. The exact words Patton chose were a direct reflection of his larger-than-life persona and his absolute refusal to engage in diplomatic pleasantries with an active enemy. He informed the German general that if his men wanted to live, their only option was unconditional surrender, effective immediately, without a single exception or condition. He added that if they refused to lay down their weapons within the hour, his artillery would rain absolute hellfire upon their positions until nothing remained. Patton concluded his message by stating that he did not bargain with defeated armies, and that their survival was entirely in their own hands, not his. This harsh response shocked some of his own staff, who felt the German request was a reasonable attempt to avoid unnecessary casualties on both sides. Yet, Patton knew that showing any leniency now would only encourage other German units to hold out for better surrender terms elsewhere. This brings us to the exact midpoint of our historical journey into the mind of America's most controversial general, and if you are captivated by this intense clash of wills, take a brief moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and leave a comment about something you didn't know before or found most interesting about Patton's tactical decisions. The German general received Patton's ultimatum while standing in a dimly lit underground bunker, listening to the shells exploding closer and closer to his position. He realized that the American commander was not bluffing, and that the lives of his remaining soldiers were ticking away with every passing minute. The German officer faced a terrible moral dilemma: sacrifice his men for a lost cause, or accept the humiliation of an unconditional surrender to a merciless foe. His decision would determine whether his battalion would see the next sunrise or become another tragic statistic in the final chapter of the war. The pressure on the German commander was immense, as he held the fate of hundreds of families in his trembling hands during those critical moments. He looked at his young soldiers, many of whom were just teenagers dragged into a conflict they could no longer understand or win. Patton's artillery units were already calculating the coordinates, waiting for the exact moment the 1-hour deadline expired to open fire. The tension across the front line was palpable, with American infantrymen holding their breath, waiting to see if they would have to storm the enemy trenches. Patton himself remained completely calm, trusting in his doctrine of relentless pressure and unwavering violence to achieve his strategic goals. He believed that hesitation caused more casualties than decisive action, and he was prepared to obliterate the battalion if they did not comply. This moment encapsulated the true horror of total war, where human lives are reduced to a chess match between powerful commanders. Ultimately, the German general recognized the futility of resistance against a commander who showed absolutely no fear or hesitation. He ordered his men to destroy their heavy equipment, raise the white flag and march out of their defensive positions with their hands raised. Patton's gamble had paid off, securing a massive tactical victory and saving American lives without firing a single additional artillery shell. The captured German soldiers were processed into prisoner-of-war camps, their fighting days over, while Patton's Third Army continued its rapid advance eastward. This incident solidified Patton's reputation as a leader who used psychological terror just as effectively as physical armor to defeat his opponents. The story of this brief exchange spread quickly among both Allied and Axis troops, serving as a stark warning to anyone who thought they could negotiate with the American general. History often remembers Patton for his flamboyant style, his ivory-handled pistols and his fiery speeches, but it was his cold calculations that won battles. His refusal to grant the German general's request was not born out of pure cruelty, but out of a calculated desire to end the war as quickly as possible. He understood that in the grand theater of conflict, any sign of hesitation could be interpreted as weakness, leading to further bloodshed down the line. The German general, on the other hand, had to live with the heavy burden of surrender, knowing he chose survival over a glorious but meaningless death on the battlefield. This interaction highlights the complex human dynamics that exist beneath the grand strategies and political maps of global warfare. It shows that even in the darkest moments of history, individual personalities and decisions shape the world we live in today. The legacy of this confrontation lives on in military academies, where students still debate the morality and effectiveness of Patton's uncompromising methods. Some historians argue that his harshness was necessary to break the enemy's will to fight, while others believe it bordered on unnecessary cruelty. Regardless of the perspective, it is undeniable that Patton's approach achieved results that altered the timeline of the entire European conflict. The German general's attempt to seek a separate peace for his men was a testament to the fractured nature of the German military command in those final months. It revealed a growing realization among German officers that their leadership had failed them, leaving them to face adversaries who offered no quarter. This specific event remains a powerful example of how psychological dominance can dictate the outcome of a battle before a single shot is fired. As the war drew to a close, Patton found himself increasingly at odds with the political realities of the post-war world, where compromise was necessary. His aggressive mindset, which was so valuable on the battlefield, became a liability in the delicate diplomatic negotiations that followed the German surrender. He struggled to adapt to a world that no longer required his specific brand of ruthless leadership and absolute black-and-white thinking. The very traits that allowed him to crush the German army made it difficult for him to navigate the peace that he helped secure. This contrast between wartime heroism and peacetime irrelevance is a tragic theme that defines the final years of Patton's remarkable life. The story of the German battalion was just one of many instances where his unyielding nature pushed the boundaries of traditional military conduct. The soldiers who served under Patton often spoke of him with a mixture of profound respect and genuine fear, knowing he demanded perfection. They knew that under his command they would be pushed to their absolute limits, but they also knew he was dedicated to winning. The German general who crossed paths with him learned this lesson in the most direct and stressful way possible, risking everything on a desperate hope. This historical account serves as a reminder that the events of World War II were driven by real people making impossible choices under extreme conditions. Every document, every message, and every spoken word carried the weight of life and death for thousands of individuals on the ground. By examining these specific moments, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of leadership and the true cost of global peace. When we look back at the final months of the war, it becomes clear that Patton's actions were driven by a singular, intense focus on total victory. He did not allow personal sympathy or military tradition to interfere with his ultimate goal of destroying the enemy's capacity to wage war. The German battalion that survived his ultimatum owed their lives to their commander's willingness to accept humiliation instead of destruction. This event remains a fascinating footnote in the history of the European theater, offering a rare glimpse into a direct psychological duel between opposing commanders. It illustrates the stark reality of the battlefield, where philosophy and action collide with devastating consequences for those involved. Patton's words to the German general will always stand as a definitive statement on his approach to command and his legacy as a warrior. The historical documents from that era confirm that Patton's Third Army was one of the most effective fighting forces in American history, largely due to his leadership. His ability to inspire his men and intimidate his enemies allowed him to liberate vast territories and alter the course of modern history. The story of the desperate German general is a microcosm of the larger collapse of the Axis forces, running out of options and time. It shows the desperation of a defeated military elite trying to salvage some dignity from the ruins of their catastrophic strategic failures. Patton's refusal to grant them that dignity was a deliberate political and military statement that echoed across the entire world stage at that time. It made it clear that the Allied forces would accept nothing less than total surrender and a complete dismantling of the enemy regime. The broader implications of this specific battlefield surrender resonated deeply across the Allied High Command, serving as a template for future encounters. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force watched closely as Patton's aggressive psychological tactics achieved clean objectives without the heavy casualty rates predicted by traditional military strategists. This encounter proved that when an enemy is entirely deprived of tactical hope, their internal command structure dissolves much faster than their physical fortifications. The field reports generated from this incident were analyzed extensively to understand the breaking point of seasoned professional German officers under severe distress. Patton proved that absolute clarity in demands, backed by an immediate and credible threat of total destruction, was the most humane weapon available. It forced the enemy to make an immediate, rational choice between life and death rather than lingering in a state of costly indecision. Furthermore, this encounter illustrated the profound deep division growing within the German ranks regarding the loyalty owed to a completely doomed regime. Many frontline commanders were beginning to realize that the suicidal orders arriving from Berlin were entirely detached from reality. By presenting such a harsh but definitive choice, Patton essentially forced these conflicted German officers to choose between professional honor and human survival. The decision of the surrounded German general to preserve his men rather than face annihilation marked a significant shift in military culture. It signaled the end of blind fanaticism among the traditional officer corps, who could no longer justify the sacrifice of lives. This specific psychological breakthrough allowed subsequent Allied advances to proceed with fewer prolonged, bitter sieges against trapped and desperate enemy holdouts. In the decades that followed the conclusion of the war, military analysts often compared Patton's aggressive stance to the classic doctrines of ancient warfare. His methods relied heavily on the concept of maintaining absolute momentum to deny the enemy any opportunity to regroup or think clearly. The incident with the surrounded German battalion demonstrated that speed and violence of action create a psychological weight that can shatter enemy morale. By refusing to offer any middle ground, Patton effectively eliminated the German commander's ability to stall for time or wait for reinforcements. This pure, unadulterated focus on victory ensured that his troops spent less time exposed to danger on the front lines of the war. It remains a classic study in how a commander can utilize the fears of his enemy to achieve a swift victory. As we look deeper into the transcripts and personal journals of those who witnessed this historical drama, the human elements become incredibly vivid. The American soldiers who stood ready at their artillery pieces remembered the intense silence that descended upon the field during that final hour. They knew that their commander's words had drawn a hard line in the dirt, and they were fully prepared to enforce it. The relief they felt when the German battalion finally emerged without their weapons was a testament to the hidden toll of warfare. Even the most hardened combat veterans preferred a bloodless surrender over the grim task of clearing out an obliterated enemy position. This shared moment of tension and subsequent relief highlighted the shared humanity that still existed beneath the opposing uniforms and flags. As we conclude this detailed look into one of the most intense psychological standoffs of World War II, the ultimate lesson remains one of decisive leadership and human survival. General Patton's legacy is forever defined by these moments of absolute certainty in the face of profound human conflict and historical chaos. If you want to support our mission to bring these incredible historical narratives to life, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and leave a comment below about what you didn't know before or found most interesting about this legendary battlefield encounter. Thank you for listening to this remarkable story of courage, strategy, and the unyielding will of a general who refused to back down.